Well, good evening once again. Great to have everyone back tonight. Before I get into this session, and actually, let me turn my mic on so that the people online can hear me as well. Before we get into this session, I just want to briefly review what we covered last night, and that was a tactical framework into which we are trying to put the information that we are going to be learning tonight and tomorrow morning. So, last two sessions, we kind of focused on three broad tasks that we want to accomplish in our communication with each other, and that is first, clarification. Second, we want reasons or evidence, and then we also want to set targets up for people. And we do that through questions. The first model question is, what do you mean by that? The second model question is, how did you come to that conclusion? And then to set up a target, you'll have to frame your own kinds of questions. There really is no template for that. But I just wanted to remind you, because we're going to revisit that in our second session this evening. So I just want to keep that in your mind. Tonight, though, we want to focus on a little bit of what's called natural theology. Natural theology, we'll back up. Historically, there have been kind of two broad categories of theology. You have general and specific, or natural and divine. So the Bible would be special or specific. That is just where God is coming right out and telling you what he thinks. But if you don't have the Bible, could you know anything about God? And historically, the answer has been yes. Even in Scripture, passages like Romans chapter 1, where Paul says that the Gentiles ought to have known what God was like to the extent that they would have praised him and thanked him. Because from the foundations of the world, his invisible attributes have been clearly seen. That's natural theology. And that is exactly what Paul did in Acts 17, when he was discussing there on the Areopagus, where he was talking with the Epicureans and the Stoics and whatever other philosophers happened to be there. Paul never quotes any scripture. He appeals to their own poets. Paul is engaging in natural theology. So even in a secular framework, you can find stuff that will point you back to God. That's the project of natural theology, and there's one element of that we are going to talk about tonight, specifically something that is called the Kalam Cosmological argument. Now, from what I understand, last year when Dean Meadows had come up, he spent a little bit of time on the Kalam. And so as I was talking with David and Bob, we were like, well, why don't we drill down and really spend just a whole session on the Kalam? And that's exactly what we're going to do. So that tactical framework that that we went through and talked about, right? What do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion, setting up targets? I was thinking, some of you may be apprehensive about the prospect of someone turning that around on you, right? Like, what happens if someone turns that around and starts using the tactics on you? Well, the reason that I love those tactics so much is because I would actually love it if someone turned that around on me, right? Imagine if someone was talking to you about Christianity and they said, hey, you're a Christian. What do you mean by Christian? Let me tell you, right? And then once I explain that and they ask, well, what kind of evidence led you to believe that Christianity is true? Well, let me tell you, right? So I'm actually excited if someone turns that around on me. But if you don't have any reasons, then that becomes a daunting prospect. Well, tonight we're talking about reasons. Why should we believe that God exists? Do we have any evidence? How did we come to that conclusion? And what I'd like to share with you tonight is I'm just going to tell you a lot of stuff that you already know, and I'm going to tell you about some stuff that you probably don't know. But for the first part, I'm just going to tell you stuff that you know and help you sort it into a premise in an argument for God's existence. So you won't have to actually learn a whole lot of new information. You'll just have to remember how to organize the information. So here's the first thing that you already know. You already know that for anything that begins to exist, that thing has got some kind of explanation, some kind of cause of its existence. For example, if you were to walk downstairs, let's say for those of you that are married, you were to walk downstairs and there is a steaming apple pie sitting on the counter, right? You can tell that it just came out of the oven because it's looking really good, right? The sun is coming through and you can see like the steam rising up. Beautiful piece of culinary art. And you ask your wife, when did you make this? Or maybe the wife comes down and the husband makes it, right? So this could be either way. So you ask your spouse, when did you make this? And your spouse says, oh, it just popped into existence and now it's on the table. I have no idea where it came from. That's absurd, right? We all know that. We know that that pie came into existence not that long ago, and that of necessity it has a cause of its existence. So this is an appeal to our inductive experience. That is to say, we have encountered this thing and it was like this. We encountered a similar thing and it was that same way. We encountered a similar thing and it was the same way. And so if we encounter something else that's similar, we can infer what? It's probably the same way. For example, teacups. Okay? Got here a selection of pictures of teacups. You will notice that each of these pictures, the teacup has a handle, right? Has anyone ever seen a teacup without a handle? Okay, maybe one. I have not. But I mean, statistically speaking, I'd say almost every teacup has got a handle. So if I told you that I had a teacup sitting behind this white square, would it have a handle? Just based on your reasoning here. It probably, almost certainly, has a handle, okay? And that's just on your limited experience of teacups. Like, how many teacups would you say that you've encountered over the course of your lifespan? Like, I'm not a tea drinker, so I'm probably in the low hundreds. But, maybe for a tea drinker, you're up into the, several thousand, maybe even the 10,000s, right? If you're like a tea connoisseur or a teacup connoisseur. So just on that sample size, I feel pretty confident in saying that if someone tells me they have a teacup, it has a handle. Okay? Pretty confident. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about inductive experience. Okay. Now let's shift gears from teacups to things that have begun to exist. Okay? So think about everything that you have ever encountered that has begun to exist. That chair. That chair. That chair. That book. All of you. Me. This microphone. This computer. My phone. My pants. Every clothing item that I've ever owned. Every car I've ever driven. Every part in every car that I've ever driven. Every part in every car that I've ever seen. Right? These are all things that have begun to exist. Question. How many of those things that you have experienced that have begun to exist have had a cause of their existence? Every single one that I'm aware of. Okay? So if we encounter something else that has begun to exist, what could we reasonably conclude about it? That it's had a cause. Now, just based on inductive experience alone, could we say for certain, yes, this thing has a cause because it began to exist? We couldn't. Induction won't get us there. Just like if I had a teacup behind that white square and I said, does it have a handle? And you said yes. And I say, do you know that for sure? Okay, well, no. Maybe there's some crazy person out there making teacups without handles, all right? But we could say with a high degree of certainty, high degree of confidence, that if you find something that has begun to exist, it has had a cause of its existence. So, inductive experience. But that's not the only thing that you know about this. The other thing that you know about this is that something cannot just pop into existence out of nothing, uncaused. So, if we were to just think about the implications of what that would entail, right? If it were true that things could just pop into being out of nothing, uncaused, then what would we expect our world to be like? Couldn't we expect for just anything and everything to pop into existence? uncaused from nothing, right? It's like, why is it that nothingness would, be so random or unpredictable? Like, if there was nothing stopping a cruise liner from just popping into existence, why doesn't it? Right? If there's nothing stopping it, if it can just pop into existence out of nothing, why doesn't root beer just appear before you? Or Beethoven just pop into existence? Well, because it's probably the case that things can't just pop into existence out of nothing, uncaused. Okay, so inductively, in our experience, things that begin to exist require causes, but further, we don't experience things just popping into existence. Because if they did, why don't they? And then there is perhaps the most powerful reason. Whereas we have induction, that can get us to a high degree of confidence. And then there's this one that I like a little bit more, where it's like, okay, well, let's just imagine what it would be like if that were true. Well, the world is nothing like that, so it's probably not true. And then there is perhaps one of the oldest metaphysical principles in all of human history, and that is, from nothing, nothing comes. It's so old that they've got Latin for it, but it was even before Latin. We're talking like the first philosophers. This is something that was thought about. But the Latin phrase is ex nihilo, nihilo fit. From nothing, nothing comes. But when I say nothing, I'm not sure that we're on the same page. For example, I want you to imagine nothing. Just think about it in your head. What is nothing like? And as you think about that, think, okay, nothing. What I thought of when I first heard that was something like an empty box. And if I wanted to get really specific, right, because, okay, so you've got a box, you close it, there's nothing in it, but there is something in it, right? Air, right? Okay, so let's launch that into space, okay? So we launch the box into space, and it's in the cold vacuum of space where there's no air, and it now there is nothing in the box. Is that nothing? There's the space in the box. Okay, now this is going to cause you to stretch your mind a little bit, okay? But how do we define the universe? Time, space, and matter. So time, or space rather, that's a thing, right? That's a place that you put stuff. Space is a thing. So if you had a box rocketing out into space with nothing inside of it, it's not true. You still have space. You've got a place that exists in that box. So, cosmologists and philosophers have recognized this for quite some time. It's actually impossible for you to think about nothing just as long as you are trying to think about something, right? When I say nothing, I don't mean something that we call nothing. And that's the mistake that a lot of people make. When they say nothing, they're talking about it as if it is this thing that has properties, like blackness or coldness. I'll tell you what, if something is black, it's not nothing. If something is cold, it's not nothing, right? Nothing has no properties. It doesn't refer to anything. It is no thing. No thing. If my wife asks me if I've been cheating on her, and I say, I haven't been cheating on you with anyone, and she says, I knew it, so his name is anyone. So you've misunderstood, right? Or if someone is relating the history of World War II, and they get to the part where the Germans are just blitzing into Poland, and the person says, nothing stopped the German advance. And the person says, whew, glad they were stopped. No, I said nothing stopped them. Exactly, they were stopped by nothing. No, they weren't stopped by anything, right? That's the confusion that we need to get away from. When I say nothing, I mean no thing. Not the empty box, nothing. The absence of anything. So, with that now understood, let's think about nothing. Or rather, let's not think about anything. If you had nothing, no thing, could you ever move from the state of having no thing to having something? It's impossible. From no thing comes. And you all know this. Okay, so we have inductive experience. Everything that we've encountered that has begun to exist has had a cause. Then we've engaged in kind of thought experiment. What if it were the case that something could come into being out of nothing uncaused? Well, then the world would be chaos. Hey, but it's not. So it's probably not true that just anything can come into being out of nothing uncaused. And then we have what I think is the most powerful reason. From nothing, truly nothing, nothing comes. And from that, we can conclude with very high degree of certainty that everything that has begun to exist has a cause. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Okay, now, you don't need to open your Bible one bit to go through that first step, right? This is just natural theology. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Now we're going to move to the second step of the argument, and that is to say that the universe has begun to exist. So everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe is a thing that has begun to exist. But how can we prove this? How can we wrap our minds around this? Well, this would be proved. Let me back up and just talk about what I mean by the universe, because this can be a point of confusion. So when I'm talking about the universe, I am talking about all of connected space-time. Okay, all of connected space-time. That word connected is important because there are some people that want to propose various models of the universe that try to get around the argument here, but they misunderstand what we mean by universe. So all of connected space-time reality. Here's a scenario. On one hand, you have our universe, right? The one that we inhabit. And then you've got like some other universe that is separate, but maybe there's some kind of causal connection. So for example, there's one model called the Oscillating Model. You don't really need to remember that, but it's just to illustrate. So on the Oscillating Model, what happens is kind of like a balloon. It blows up, and then it runs out of stuff to keep pushing it, right? And then gravity pulls it back in, and then it compresses, and then there's too much pressure, and it goes, and just up, down, up, down. It's an oscillating model. And so when they say, okay, well, yeah, the universe began to exist, but it was just caused by the previous oscillation, right? So that would be your other universe with the causal connection to our universe. Okay, well, the definition of the universe is all of connected space-time. So are these space-times connected? They are. So that means that this whole thing is just the universe, right? Every single oscillation, even if we grant that model, every single oscillation would just be the universe. So if there's any connection between any other space-time, that just becomes the universe, okay? That's what we're saying began to exist. All of connected space-time. What reasons do we have for that? We're going to talk about something called the second law of thermodynamics. Second law of thermodynamics, the simple way to think about it is everything gets worse over time. It's the reason your kid's room is always messy, right? Things they always tend toward disorder, right? That's why you can't keep your house clean. That's why your car breaks down. Everything tends toward disorder. But the more precise way of stating it is that everything tends toward equilibrium. That's the more precise way to say it. And the reason that that's the more precise way to say it is because the second law has to do with heat, or temperature, or energy. That's what the second law is really concerned about. And so what the second law says is that the different levels of energy will always tend to equalize. So if you have a lot of energy over here and a little energy over here, then over time, that will tend to equalize. It's why if you put a heater on this side of the room, you'll turn it on, and it won't just get hot right there. It will move throughout the whole room given enough time. So in a closed system, I should have specified that, right? Of course, if you're adding energy from one side or taking energy away, then that will impede the equalization. But just so long as you have a closed system, then those levels are going to equalize. Now, the reason I have Minecraft up here, I see some young people, so they probably know what I mean, but who all is familiar with Minecraft? Okay, all right. It's a video game where basically you just get to create your own world. Everything is in little squares, and you can put squares where you want them. There's like wood and dirt and any other element that you want, and you get to build your own world, basically. So here's an interesting feature about Minecraft. This is the dirt block. But there's also grass blocks. And so you can take a grass block and put it in the dirt blocks. Okay? Now, if you do this, the game has a mechanic where it will automatically spread grass to other dirt blocks. So if you wait enough time, this dirt block will convert to a grass block. And if you wait enough time, then more dirt blocks will convert. And over time, if you put one block of grass, it will convert every other dirt block given enough time. Okay? So now that you have that rudimentary understanding of Minecraft, what if I were to show you that picture right there? Okay? And what if I were to tell you that I had manually placed that block right there? What could you infer about the time period between me placing the block and you viewing the image? What could you conclude? The time has elapsed, and how much time? It'd be hard to say exactly how much time. Nevertheless, you could say that it wasn't that long ago, right? You could just be super general and say, well, at least I know that you placed that block a finite amount of time ago. You could at least tell me that. Because what would it look like if I had placed that block an infinite amount of time ago? It would be completely green, right? If there is even one dirt block left on that image, you know that it was a finite amount of time ago. Because if it had been placed an infinite amount of time ago, then everything would be converted to grass. Okay? So that's one illustration. Let's think about it in a different way. What if I hand you a can of Coke? All right? And you sip it, and it's got so much carbonation that it like makes your eyes water, it goes up your nose a little bit, right? What can you conclude about the time period between me opening the can and me handing you the can? Yeah, like just a couple seconds ago, okay? All right. So what if I handed it to you and there was just a little tiny little bit of fizz left? Well, longer time, right? Okay, so what if the people at Coca-Cola invented some special kind of carbonation process and some special kind of liquid such that once you opened it, it stayed carbonated for an absurd amount of time? Such that if I open it, leave it for a year, come back, it's still super fizzy. Now, of course, it can't stay fizzy forever, right? They're not that good, but for an absurdly long time, this thing can stay carbonated. Okay, so if you come back to this can and you taste it, and it has even just a tiny little bit of fizz left, what can you conclude about the can? Well, that it was opened at least some finite amount of time ago. What if that can had been opened an infinite amount of time ago? You taste it, what would it taste like? Completely flat, right? Given an infinite amount of time, that can is going flat. No matter how good the technology is, if it is decreasing in carbonation even just ever so slightly, given an infinite amount of time, it will be flat. Okay? Think about it one more way. Paint mixing. Okay? I want you to imagine an absurdly large paint mixing machine with an absurd amount of paint in it. on one side it has been filled with red paint, on the other side it has been filled with blue paint. All right? Like seriously, you open this lid and it's just paint as far as the eye can see. Okay? And it's mixing. And it's mixing, and it's mixing. And you open this lid and you see largely purple, right? But you notice that on one side it's still more red, on the other side it's still more blue. What can you conclude about the duration of the operation of this machine? It has not always been mixing paint, right? It has been mixing paint only for a finite amount of time. Because if it had been mixing for an infinite amount of time, what would you see? Just purple, right? No matter how slow, right? And this is crucial. No matter how slow that machine mixes paint, given an infinite amount of time, you open that lid, it will be purple. Because it's been mixing for infinity. Okay, so now, instead of grass blocks, carbonation, and paint, let's think in terms of heat, the second law, okay? Here's more heat, less heat. That's how we need to think about this. Let's think about our universe. When we look out into our universe, what do we see? More heat there. Pocket of heat there. More heat, more heat. Every star that you see is a pocket of heat. Okay, well, what does the second law of thermodynamics say? That in a closed system, everything will tend to equalize. So, our universe, this is important, is our universe a closed system? By definition, it is. It is all connected space-time. So if you had a universe here and then a different universe here sharing energy, inputting energy into our universe, what would this be? The universe. Okay? So by definition, the universe is a closed system. So if the second law says that everything tends toward equilibrium, and we look out and we see disequilibrium, what can we conclude about the duration of our universe's past? It's finite. Because if it were infinite, what would we see? We would see all grass blocks, right? We would see flat soda. We would see purple paint. But that's not what we see. We see patches of dirt. There's still carbonation left in the can, right? The paint is still mixing. There's red on one side, blue on the other. There's still stars in our universe. Therefore, the universe's past is only finite, not infinite. So, second law of thermodynamics gives us excellent reason for thinking that the universe began to exist a finite amount of time ago. Okay? That's not the only argument, though. So by and large, we've been talking about things that you know, okay? Now we're going to talk about something that maybe you don't know. And this is going to be interesting. We'll see how this goes. We're going to talk about infinity, all right? So I've been using the word infinite, but I want to get really specific about what we mean by infinity. There are two different kinds of infinity, broadly speaking. There are potential infinites, and there are actual infinites. So a potential infinite is something that does not actually have an infinite number of members, an infinite number of members. Rather, it just increases without limit. So think of a machine that would never break down, and it's just a counting machine. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you push the button and it starts counting, okay, well, that is a potential infinite, because that will just keep going without any limit, all right? That's only potential. It does not have an actually infinite number of members, though. It's just increasing without limit. An actual infinite, on the other hand, just exists as a collection of infinite objects. Now, you can come up after and I'll define what an infinite set is, but you don't really need to worry about that. You just need to know the difference between a potential and an actual infinite. Think about it this way. When you get to heaven, how long will you be there? potentially infinitely. Because you will start on day 1, right? Day 1. And then you get to day 2 and 3. And when is that going to end? Never. But you started all the way at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's going to increase without limit. So you will be in heaven for a potentially infinite amount of time. On the other hand, if you were to just think of the whole set of natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, the whole set, not counting, just the whole set, that is an actually infinite number. Okay, so just keep those distinct in your mind. Potential, actual. Now with that in mind, here is the next reason for why we know that the universe began to exist. You cannot ever create an actual infinite one step at a time. You can never do it. You can never create an actually infinite number of things one step at a time. So let's think about that machine that counted up, right? Let's say it had an odometer, right? But this is a special odometer, technology like we've never seen before, such that whenever the first slot fills up, right, it gets to 9, another slot is created beside it. And so it goes from 9, and then just as it's about to flip, the other one is created, 10. And then that gets to 99, and then just as it's about to flip, another one's created, 100. 999,000, right? So it just keeps going. Question: when will the odometer read infinity? Never. Because it can always add another slot. It can always add just one more number before it ever gets to infinity. So remember the reason, the premise is you can never form an actual infinite one step at a time. You can always add one more member before you reach infinity. So you can see that with the odometer, but it's actually worse when it comes to the universe, okay? So what we just did, here we are at today, right? What we just did, what we just simulated was this. Starting from today, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? But what is that neglecting? Yeah, we're not trying to get up to infinity when it comes to the history of the universe, right? If the past were infinite, we wouldn't be trying to get up to infinity. We'd be trying to get down from infinity. So this is a more realistic picture, right? This is day 0. 1, 2, 3, 4 is in the future, and then -1, -2, that's the past. We just simulated up to infinity. What we need, if the universe is infinite, is this: counting down from infinity. So here's what that would look like. That would look like you coming across someone, and they're a rather peculiar fellow, and they seem really disheveled, wearing ratty clothing, they smell bad, and you come up to them, and they're just kind of talking to themselves, and they're saying, -4, -3, -2, -1, 0. Whew! I did it. I just counted down from infinity. That's what we are encountering, okay? Someone has just counted down from infinity. Now that gives you some interesting information. That means that the past is infinite, right? Now let's just make it super easy and say that this person just counted one time every hour, all right? So every hour he counts 1, or -1, all right? And so 1 hour passes, he counts 1, and you meet him just as he says 0, and you now know that the past is infinite. That's incredible. You didn't know that before. But this new information raises a question in your mind. Because think about it. If the past is infinite, then wouldn't that mean that it was also infinite yesterday? Now think about it. If you are now at today, and before you is an infinite past, and you subtract 1 day from that, how much past is left? An infinite past. Like, if you subtract 1 from infinity, you still have infinity. Okay? So, today the past was infinite. Well, that means that yesterday the past was infinite too. So here's my question. If yesterday the past was infinite, why is it that this person only finished his count today and not yesterday? Right? Because yesterday the past was infinite, so he would have had an infinite amount of time to count down, meaning that yesterday he would have already reached the end of his count. But then you start to think, wait a second, if the past was infinite yesterday, then wouldn't the past have been infinite at any point in history? Like, for example, if we go back like 4 trillion years, the past would have still been infinite. Because 4 trillion, or infinity minus 4 trillion is still infinity. So, this person, theoretically, would have already completed his count 4 trillion years ago. And this works for any point in history, right? Once you learn that the past is infinite, well, now you can select any point on that timeline, and it will always be an infinite amount of time before that point. And so this person would have completed his count at any point in the past. Let me put it to you in the way that philosopher William Lane Craig summarizes it. He says, at any point, an infinite amount of time would have already elapsed, and therefore, it seems that he would have already finished. If he could finish his infinite countdown by today, then it seems that he would have finished at any point in the past, which is absurd. But if he would have finished his countdown at any point in his past, what that means is that no matter how far you regress back in the past, you will never find the person finishing. Because at any point that you reach, he will have already been done by then. But if at no point in the finite past could you find the man finishing his countdown, then it's not true that he has been counting down from eternity. You could never find him finishing his countdown at any point in the past. Therefore, you reach the self-contradictory conclusion that he is not counting down from infinity after all. To summarize, you pick this day, he already finished. Okay, pick this day, he's already finished. Pick this day, already finished. Pick this day, already finished. For any day you pick, he's already finished. That means that you can never find this man finishing his count. Never. Which just means that he can't do it. It's self-contradictory. So, with the idea of counting down from infinity, we already saw, right? Don't lose track of where we are. So, the odometer, you cannot count up to infinity just step by step. The odometer will never read infinity. But it's worse. You don't have to count up to infinity, you have to count down from infinity. And so it's doubly absurd. Because not only can you not do it, but it's self-contradictory. For any man that's counting down to infinity, he will never be counting down to infinity. For every day you pick, he's already done it. So, this is commonly known as the impossibility of traversing the infinite. You can never get to infinity one step at a time. If you could do it at all, you'd have to do it all at once. It's the only way to do it. But you can't do it just one step at a time. But let's think about the past of our universe. How has the past of our universe been constructed? All at once? Or step by step? Step by step. There was yesterday, then there was the day before that, then there was the day before that, right? That is sequential, one step at a time. So, if you can never form an actual infinite, just one step at a time, and our universe's past was constructed one step at a time, what does that imply about the past of our universe? That it cannot be actually infinite. Because for any collection that you form step by step, it can never be actually infinite. So, let's review where we've been. Everything that begins to exist has a cause, right? It's your personal experience. The world would be chaos if it were like that. And from nothing, nothing comes. Okay, so everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. How do we know that? Well, second law of thermodynamics. Everything will tend toward equilibrium, right? Everything will become grass. The carbonation will run out. The paint will be mixed. Okay, well, there's still pockets of heat in the universe. Still red and blue. Still dirt blocks, whatever. So what does that imply? That the past of our universe, the least we can say is that the past of our universe is finite. Because if it were infinite, then everything would be equal. There would be no stars. It would just be all the same temperature everywhere. Okay, so that's second law of thermodynamics. But then we also have the argument from forming an actual infinite. You can't do it step by step. Can't do it going forward, can't do it coming down. So what does that imply about our universe? Since it is a collection assembled step by step, it can also not be actually infinite. So for those two reasons, and there are others, but at least for those two reasons, the past of our universe is finite, which means it began to exist. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Okay, now you might be thinking, that's all well and good, Aaron. Okay, the universe has a cause. So what? We have no idea what that cause looks like, what it smells like. We know nothing about this cause. There we need to take a step back and think about, okay, the thing that is caused is the universe. So, based on the effect, right, the thing that has been caused, we can reason back to a couple of properties of the cause itself. Right? If a tsunami hits Japan, then you can reason some properties of that cause. Right? Further, if you know that a frog jumped into the ocean just before that, you know the frog wasn't the cause. Right? So you can infer some properties of a cause based on the cause's effect. So what's the universe? Well, it is all of space, time, and matter, right? Let me introduce to you another philosophical principle. Nothing can be the cause of itself. Okay, how did I get here? I didn't cause myself. How did the podium get here? Didn't cause itself. That's absurd. Nothing can cause itself. So if the universe is space, time, and matter, what does that imply about the cause? It can't be any of those three things. Otherwise, you're just saying that space caused space, which is absurd. So, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. If it caused space, time, and matter, then it can't be those things. So it's spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. But let's think about what it means for something to be timeless. What does that mean? What does that imply? Okay, well, time is... actually, let me back up. If anything ever undergoes any change, that requires time. Right? Something cannot change if there's no time. And if something does change, there must be time, because that necessitates some kind of before and after relation. That's time. So if this cause is timeless, what does that imply about its nature? That it is unchanging, that it's changeless, spaceless, timeless, immaterial, changeless. But then look at the universe itself, the magnitude of it, the sheer size of it. What could cause something this enormous? Only something that was incredibly powerful. Spaceless, timeless, changeless, immaterial, incredibly powerful, and then lastly, I would add, personal. Now, personal is a little bit difficult to see, but let me run through a couple of reasons and see if it makes sense to you, and then we'll be done. If you have a cause that is timeless, and that cause has the necessary and sufficient conditions to produce the universe, then why isn't the universe eternally old? Think about it this way. These lights that are on right now, what is causing those lights to be on? Well, I know there's like electricity and all those things, but just like simply the light switch being in the on position, all right? So we'll just simplify it to that. The reason that these lights are on is that the switch is in the on position. Okay, that is the necessary and sufficient condition for these lights to be on. So, if this light switch has existed timelessly and changelessly, how long have the lights been on? Forever, right? Forever. So if the necessary and sufficient conditions exist for the effect forever, then the effect will be seen forever. But what have we just learned about the universe? It's finite. It's not forever years old. So what does that imply about the cause? At some point, it had to move from the off position to the on position. At some point, it had to undergo some kind of change. So even though the cause was itself timeless and changeless, at some point, it had to stop being that. It had to move to the on position. But, newsflash, light switches don't flip themselves. Inanimate objects do not flip themselves. Only persons have the power to go from a state of not doing something to doing something without some kind of external force. That's the only kind of thing that we know of. Persons, they have the ability to change internally without external forces. So that's one reason that we can think that this cause is personal. Second reason is that there's only two kinds of immaterial things, right? Because remember, this cause is immaterial. Only two kinds of things that philosophers have been able to think of that could be immaterial. First one is abstract objects. So you can think of like numbers if you're a Platonist. So like numbers exist out there as abstract objects. And then minds. Not minds like you step on, but like your mind, right? Abstract objects and minds. Specifically an unembodied mind. Well, here's the thing about abstract objects. The way that they are defined, like if you're going to define an abstract object, here's how you would define it. An object that has no causal power. That is one of the defining features of abstract objects. So, if the abstract object is out there, right, when's the universe being created? Never, because it has no causal power. Guess what does have causal power? A mind. Controls my body right now. Now, it might be a little bit hard to figure out exactly how that mind would create the universe, but at least it has causal power. And minds are personal. So, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Well, what's that cause like? Well, it's spaceless, timeless, immaterial, changeless, incredibly powerful, and likely personal. That sounds a lot like what we mean when we say God. Indeed, any atheist who claimed to believe in a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, changeless, incredibly powerful, personal being that caused the universe, I don't think I would call him an atheist. So this at least gets us to a generic monotheism, and you don't have to appeal to the Bible at all. That is the Kalam Cosmological argument, and it's a great way to move someone from atheism or agnosticism to at least a generic monotheism. Thank you all for your patience. It took you a little bit over, but we're done, and then we'll come back for a second session. Thank you.